An important part of telling effective stories is having full control of your camera. Let's begin with aperture, an important function when properly exposing an image and adjusting its depth of field. The aperture is the opening mechanism on a lens which allows light to reach a camera's sensor. If you look at this lens, you can see that the hole in the camera is made up of these aperture blades. They can make the hole bigger or smaller. This opening is measured in f-stops. The bigger the f number, the smaller the hole, or less light is let in. And the smaller the f number, the bigger the hole and the more light is let in. Our eyes act very similar to a lens aperture. Our pupils shrink to let less light in or dilate to allow more light in, depending on our surroundings. Opening and closing the aperture is one way to alter the exposure of an image. Aperture also determines something called depth of field, which is the portion between the furthest and closest elements of what the camera sees that would be considered in focus. If I set my aperture to a low f number, the hole in the lens opens up and has what's called a shallow depth of field. When opening the aperture, the depth of field shrinks, less of my shot is in focus, so the depth of field is now easier to see. Now to illustrate this in a different way, if you look at the setup I have here, I've placed my camera on a slider. At this shallow depth of field, if I slide my camera from the back of the slider to the front, you can clearly see the entire depth of field moving along with the camera's position. If I set my aperture to a high f number, the hole in the lens becomes smaller and a large depth of field is achieved. The bokeh or bokeh of an image is also affected by aperture. Bokeh is actually a Japanese word that literally translates as blur or haze. Bokeh is all of the out of focus portions of an image. Different lenses create different quality bokeh. It can be used subtly or to a more dramatic effect. Look, I know this is a lot of information to take in, so I've included a cheat sheet in the resources panel. Print those off or have them saved as images on your phone so you can refer to them while shooting as necessary. Okay, this takes time and practice, so be kind to yourself. To recap, aperture is the mechanism in the back of the lens that is used to brighten or darken an image, and also is used to determine how much of an image is in focus. Remember, the smaller the f-stop is, the more wide open the aperture will be, allowing more light to pass through and have less depth of field. The smaller the aperture, the less light passes through and the larger the depth of field. The aperture also creates bokeh, which is all the parts of an image that are out of focus. The smaller the aperture, the more bokeh will be present in your shot. If you increase your aperture, the bokeh will become less noticeable. In the next lesson, we're going to learn more about what affects depth of field.